Recording has been started.
Good morning, everyone. Today is Saturday, May 13th, and my name is Dr. Adityanjee. I'm the president of the Council for Strategic Affairs. We are having our monthly roundtable discussion today. And those of you who registered probably saw this flyer, and it shows the pictures of all our expert panelists. The topic for today's roundtable discussion is Senkaku Islands dispute and possibility of a Sino-Japanese war. For sake of reference, it shows the Senkaku Islands. They go by a different name. Communist China calls it Diao Islands, and Republic of Taiwan calls it Tiao Tai Islands. So that is just for the sake of reference. We have a distinguished panel from 3 different countries spanning from east to west. So our panelists include Dr. Swasti Rao, Dr. Professor Miles Mauchan Yu, Ms. Masako Ganaha, and Commodore Anil Jai Singh. A little bit about Council for Strategic Affairs. CSA imparts education in the field of international relations. CSA fosters discussion, dialogue, and debate on geopolitical issues. CSA encourages strategic studies in general to raise the level of awareness. The Council condemns terrorism in its all forms anywhere in the world, and the Council aims to contribute towards world peace and prosperity. Our activities include a monthly roundtable discussion just like we are having today. It is scheduled every second Saturday of month at 10 a.m. Eastern Daytime. We have a monthly guest lecture by a domain expert on 4th Saturday of every month. We organize symposia, meetings, and conferences. We promote publications of articles on geopolitics and related subjects. We have a summer internship program for college students, and we are starting now a fellowship training program in geopolitics. The format for roundtable discussion is that I will introduce each of the expert panelists. Each panelist will be given 5 minutes opening statement, and my hope is that everyone will stick to the timeline. The opening statements will be followed by a moderated discussion in which I will ask each panelist a question which is specific for the panelist concerned. Lastly, we will have general Q&A from the audience members. So let me go to our panelists. Our first panelist is Dr. Swasti Rao, who is an associate fellow at the Europe and Eurasia Center at Manohar Parrikar Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis. She has an MA and MPhil in International Politics from JNU and has completed her PhD in Advanced International Comparative Politics from Tsukuba University in Japan. She also holds an adjunct research position at the University of Tokai in Japan. So she has lived in Japan. Before joining MPIDSA, she was teaching strategic and security studies at AMU. She specializes in foreign and defense and security policies of the European countries. Her research interests explore dimension of securitization debate in Europe, migrant crises, Europe's outreach to Indo-Pacific defense cooperation between India and major European players, multilateral cooperation for space situational awareness and maritime domains. She also explores Europe-Japan relations and its global implications, and that is her picture over there. Our second expert panelist is retired Commodore Anil Jai Singh. He is the Vice President of the Indian Maritime Foundation and heads its Delhi branch. He was commissioned in Indian Navy in January of 1981 and took premature retirement in 2011. In his 3 decades wide experience, he had distinction of commanding 4 submarines and a fleet ship. He also served in the Directorates of Naval Plans and Submarine Acquisition at Naval Headquarters and was involved in drafting Navy's 30 years submarine construction plan and the 15-year shipbuilding plan, which we are now coming to fruition. Commodore A. Jai Singh has been a directing staff at the College of Naval Warfare, senior instructor at the National Defence Academy, Khadakwasla, and the Defence and Naval Adviser at Indian High Commission in London. His last appointment was as Deputy Assistant Chief Maritime in the Perspective Planning and Force Deployment branch of the Integrated Defence Staff in MOD. A postgraduate of Defense and Strategic Studies, he is an alumnus of the NDA, Defense Services Staff College, and the College of Naval Warfare. He is keenly interested in matters in maritime. He speaks and writes on various subjects regularly in India and abroad, and is also involved with Indian industry associations on defense procurement and indigenization issues. And you see his picture here. Our third panelist is Dr. Professor Miles Mao Chan-Ju. He is currently a senior fellow and director of the China Center at the Hudson Institute. He is also a professor of East Asia and military and naval history at United States Naval Academy in Annapolis in Maryland. Dr. Yu specializes in Chinese military and strategic culture, US and Chinese military and diplomatic history, and US policy towards China. Dr. Yu was part of Trump administration and served as the China policy advisor to Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. In that capacity, he advised the Secretary on all China-related issues, helped overhaul US policy towards China, and participated in key US government intra-agency deliberations on major policy and government actions with regard to China and other East Asian countries, including Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan. He is a visiting fellow at the Hoover Institution as a member of Military History Contemporary Conflict Working Group. And from 2011 to 2016, he wrote a weekly column, Inside China, for Washington Times. Since 1996, he has been editorial consultant to Radio Free Asia and a contributor to various media outlets, including the Wall Street Journal and PBS NewsHour. Dr. Yu has published widely on topics in his field. He has written multiple books like OSS in China, Prelude to Cold War, published by Yale University, The Dragon's War, Allied Operations and Fate of China, etc., etc. He has numerous awards that include US Naval Academy Top Researcher Award, US Naval Special Actions Award, and US Navy's Meritorious Service Award. Dr. Yu received doctorate in history from University of California at Berkeley, a master's degree from Swarthmore College, and a bachelor's degree from Nankai University. And you will see him, or you have already seen him. I may add the most important badge of honor. Dr. Yu was sanctioned by Communist Party controlled China very recently. And I am pretty sure everyone in the United States considers that as a badge of honor. And our last panelist is Ms. Masako Ganaha, who shares her name with the Japanese princess. Masako Ganaha is an independent international journalist from Okinawa, Japan. She was born in Nago, Okinawa, and educated at Waseda University. She has traveled extensively from Japan to Davos, Switzerland to cover the World Economic Forum and report on the threat of globalism. She also recently covered the farmers' uprising in Netherlands. She reported on the ground from there how the farmers were being tactical with their movement and their revolt. She is a votary of free speech worldwide and anti-globalist activist. She runs Masako Ganaha official channel on Rumble and YouTube. Sometimes her videos do get banned and taken down from various platforms. And she did a very important program on CCCP's influence in Japan with Masako Ganaha. And that is her picture. And she is joining us from Japan, where it is 11 p.m. Couple of housekeeping rules. Please mute yourself to avoid noise interference. Please change your cell phone setting to vibration mode. Please do not try to interrupt our esteemed panelists. Only those members of the audience who identify themselves openly will be allowed to ask questions. When you are submitting questions in the chat room, please be precise and specific. Don't send a lengthy monologue in form of question. Lastly, this conversation is being recorded. This roundtable discussion would be available in next few hours for everyone to view. It will be available on our website. And I will start with opening statements for each of our 4 distinguished panelists. Each panelist will speak, give the opening statement for 5 minutes. And I will start with Dr. Swasti Rao. Dr. Swasti Rao, your opening statement, please. Greetings.
Thank you. I hope I'm audible to everybody. And thank you so much for having me over. And without further ado, let me make use of the time that is given to me. So what I have done is that in the 5 minutes that are given to me, I would be basically trying to make 5 important points of what I argue generally when it is about Senkaku and how, Japan is trying to link security between Europe and here, etc. So essentially, and I would love to take questions on it later, and that is the format of this, webinar today. So the first point that I'd like to say is that it's been almost now 10 years, a little more than 10 years since the Japanese government nationalized the Senkaku Islands by formally purchasing, those islands, etc. And ever since, tensions with Chinese state have increased. If you look at the data, you would see that as Japan is upgrading its ability to project power from nearby islands, so is, China kind of has been, starting with, there's been a rise in the number of Chinese government vessels in that contiguous zone, okay, and particularly starting around 2009, 2010, and it is very, very visible after they were nationalized. If you look at the graph, the graphs are available, you would see that there's a steep rise starting from around 2013 or so, and they have definitely gone up, lately. So that was the first point. The second point is that in this scenario, Japan definitely faces an uphill battle. If it tries to maintain control over the waters around the Senkakus, it can't really do it with ships alone because, it cannot numerically build as many ships as China has. Nor can its Coast Guard vessels really compete with the latest Chinese models on size or armaments. So what really Japan is trying to do is that Japan is trying to turn to geography to its advantage, in the sense that there is a lot of analysis that has emerged that in recent years, Tokyo has invested in capabilities in the nearby Southwest Islands to better monitor and defend the waters around Senkaku from land. So if you look at, efforts that are starting around 2017, you'd see that most of the upgrades back then in Japan focused on better radar, signals intelligence, patrol capabilities, etc. Missile units were also planned, but not established then. And ever since 2017 and onwards, I see a steady rise in how Japan has made a substantial progress and has launched new initiatives. Now, obviously, when I talk about this, I think Japan is focusing more on the islands of Ishigaki and Miyako because, the Senkakus are about 200 nautical miles from the Chinese coast, but less than 100 nautical miles from Ishigaki and Miyako. So these two regions are extremely important for Japan. The third point that I want to make is that Japan is not just doing it with what I just told you, but one of the other primary measures that Japan has lately taken is to enhance its island defense capabilities, and that Japan has been doing through the deployment of anti-ship and surface-to-air missiles throughout that island chain. So in addition, say, to a SAM unit deployed to Okinawa, Japan has also constructed facilities and activated new units, etc. And precisely around the regions that I just told you about, which is Amami, Oshima, Miyako, Ishigaki, etc. The fourth point is that the renewed problem arises because of definitely tensions over the Taiwan Strait. I mean, the US-China tensions over the Taiwan Strait. And in this case, definitely Japan will respond. But the important takeaway here is that everybody understands now that according to China's logic, the unification with Taiwan that the Chinese are so determined to achieve, at least in rhetoric, it will not be complete until the sovereignty over Senkakus is also made a reality. Now, obviously, Japan cannot afford to look at the defense of Senkaku as a matter which is only concerning Japan. So a Taiwan emergency and a Senkaku emergency would surely become interlocking contingencies, and Japan must prepare accordingly. So, and what is interesting is that, you see why Japan is trying so hard these days to pitch that the victory of Ukraine as is going to be a safety for the, safety, or is going to be a guarantee for the safety of Taiwan. And, Japan, and especially the Prime Minister Kishida, have been trying very hard to link, the security from Europe to Asia as indivisible, right? But like I said, that how do you do that better? So that is the fifth and the last point that I want to make, is that, Japan, particularly in 2022, something very important happened there. And that is where the new security strategy and the new defense strategy come with the backdrop. There is a war going on in Ukraine. I'm not taking it up right away. I would take it up later. And there have been rising threats from North Korea and China. So you have to sort of keep these in mind when you want to understand, Japan's new national defense policy, etc. So there are two things. One is the national security strategy, which focuses on counter-strike capabilities, and the other is the national defense policy, which talks about, to ramping up the defense spending in line with about 2% of the GDP by 2027, which is pretty much in line with NATO standards. So, so this NSS, the new security strategy, is Japan's first in nearly 10 years. The last came in 2013 under Abe, and actually it's just the second ever. So the first came in 2013, the second has come in 2022, or 2012 or 2013, and the second has come 10 years later. And the strategy navigates the country's response to significant changes in the regional and global security environment, which actually includes Russia's invasion of Ukraine and reflects on Japan's growing sense of vulnerability vis-a-vis its immediate neighbors as well. So this is the backdrop. And if I just would like to just conclude, here, is that is where you understand that Japan, also in these two documents, Japan has made it very clear that it would need to ally with partners and, friends and, like-minded countries. And I think what is the most important significant progress in this regard is where I see that just a week ago, NATO, because of its pivoting to Indo-Pacific, has opened its first liaison office in Japan. And this is going to be an extremely important measure in where things are going, and it is going to have global implications as well. But like I said, that this is the last thing, which is that I look at this particular security juncture as, as an inevitable merging of the two security theaters of transatlantic and Indo-Pacific. And what we see happening right now in Japan is the first step to actually see a tangible progress around it. And definitely, it has lots of implications. I would love to take it up later. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Swasti Rao. In your opening statement, you delivered a power punch. Each of the 5 points were extremely important. And we will go to our next expert panelist, who is Masako Ganaha. So Masako, please take 5 minutes to make your opening statement, please. And she is joining from Japan, where it is now 11:15 or 11:20 p.m. at night. Please unmute yourself, Masako. Please unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Nice to meet you, everyone. This is Masako Ganaha from Okinawa, Japan. Right now, I'm in Okinawa, I was born and raised in Okinawa. And so today, I'm so honored to be able to join this discussion and with those very special opinion leaders. So today, I think I would like to share with you the local atmosphere and the on-the-ground report, because I don't have a title, as you know, and you know much more about this policies and the all of the studies. So I would like to share with you, as a local person, how people in Okinawa are thinking, or how we are acting, and what we are concerned. And so I will be very quick. So firstly, I have to say that not only people in Okinawa, but also all of the Japanese people are sleeping. We do see the news that Chinese Coast Guard, or their Navy ships, are invading our territorial water, or our Japanese self-defense force has to deal with their violation of airspace. But most of the Japanese are still sleeping, and we are thinking that we are living in a peacetime. So there is a difference between how Japanese people see the world and what is actually happening. So in this sense, CCP is doing very good on information operation. And the reason why I started to do this activity as doing this report, being a journalist, is because I wanted to wake Japanese people up. And I'm from Nago City. Nago City is where American Camp Schwab is located. It's a very disputed camp because local newspaper want to get rid of US military out of Okinawa. And on behalf of, we see it as CCP. So there has been many leftist activists in front of those bases doing protest, but those people do not represent true local people. A lot of the leftists all over Japan gather in Okinawa, and then they do those kind of ideological activity. So beginning of my activity started as conveying our true local voices to mainland Japan. That's how my activity started. And as I continued to learn what is happening in my country, I realized that Japan do not have sovereignty, because actually at this point, Japanese politicians do not actively warn us, saying that CCP are after us, CCP are after Senkaku Island. And so this information operation is conveyed heavily, and I just realized something is wrong. And the reason why I'm doing this journalism is because I wanted to find out what is really happening and why Japanese politicians, even the ruling party, LDP, when they come to Okinawa, they don't warn us about this threat. They always apologize us for putting a lot of US bases and Japanese base. So about this, what should we say? To protecting country is a forbidden topic. I think it comes from the law back in after World War II. GHQ deployed heavy information operation. So we have this war guilty, which makes us still think protecting our country or being strong is a bad thing. So I think this this is the basis of Japanese people's thinking mind. So this is what I can say as a local Okinawan. And I think I'm running out of time, so I'm going to stop here. And later I would like to discuss about recent US ambassadors' obvious interference of domestic affairs in terms of LGBTQ law. It's a different topic from the military aggression by CCP, but this incident, we can learn who control Japan or who Japanese politicians listen to. Thank you very much.
Sorry, I was muted. It's my distinct pleasure now to invite Dr. Miles Yu for his opening statement. Dr. Miles, please take the floor.
Well, thank you for having me here. I'm very honored to join this distinguished panel. Good morning and good evening from Washington, D.C. And I have to make a disclaimer that my views are just my own. They do not represent the views of the U.S. government. I have a very fond memories of visiting India and Japan when I was working at the State Department a few years ago under a different regime. I remember my last trip with the Secretary Pompeo was to India. And I learned a lot of things from my Indian colleagues. And foremost, most important things, I know the important value of H-1B visa to friends in India. So, and also, of course, I remember my fond memory in Tokyo to attend the Quad, and where Foreign Minister Jaishankar and Prime Minister Suga make a very strong points about issues such as territorial disputes with China. So I think, there are many territorial disputes in the world. They basically, they originate from three main sources. One is the imperial legacy. In the Chinese case, China has been a middle kingdom for way too long, and China believed all the periphery countries belong to it. So this is basically what we call the tributary system. And of course, another source is colonialism. There's colonial legacy when the Europeans occupy a lot of foreign lands, and normally without regard to regional indigenous boundaries. And when they left, so normally it's left with a mess. You can see this in the Middle East and in Asia, a lot of places. So that's another source. Another source, obviously, is the civilization states. That is, for countries like Russia and China, they really view themselves as a guardian of the whole civilization. So anybody who belongs to that civilizational bloc should be under their dominance. You can see this in today's Russia, who invaded Ukraine, in the pretext that somehow Ukrainians were part of the Slavic civilizational bloc, and China has basically all the three major elements. That's why China has the most territorial disputes in the world, with more countries than anybody. So China has a territorial dispute with you name it, South Korea, Japan, of course, Taiwan. The whole thing belongs to China according to the Chinese view, and Vietnam, India, and many countries in the South China Sea. So it's really up to China to select, to pick a fight with countries they don't like. So territory and history leave China with many choices. And I think Senkaku is one of the very obvious ones. The interesting thing about Senkaku dispute is, for the longest time, it was never a dispute. Both Taiwan and China recognize the U.S. occupation of the islands and the Ryukyu Island. And then all of a sudden, 1968 came, and several things happened in 1968. Number one, in that year, United Nations sponsored a survey and in that area, and basically try to bring up this issue of oil reserve and also continental shelf. So this is basically is one of the very interesting things that stimulate people's action. And then the second thing, which is very important, is the United States elected Richard Nixon as president. So Richard Nixon is a very important president in determining the fate of Asia. And one of his most important initiatives, he decided to return the U.S.-occupied Ryukyu Island to Japan. And then the issue then arises, who really should the Senkaku Islands return to Japan? This was never an issue. But in July 1970, Taiwanese government asked the Japanese Foreign Ministry to define exactly what the Nansei Shoto means, the Ryukyu Island. So the Japanese government responded and say, listen, I'm going to study do some study on international law and get back to you. And in between the official answer, before the official answer came to Taipei, and the group of Taiwanese activists landed on the island and planted the Taiwanese flag there. So, and then in September 1970, Japan responded to Taipei saying that the sovereignty of the Senkaku Island is not for negotiation. It belongs to Japan. And the Taiwan obviously was not very happy. So President Nixon decided, let's form a tripartite committee to take place in Tokyo. So this will be Taiwan, Japan, and South Korea to discuss, to figure out a nice way to solve this problem. And that's where China got in, because China does not like Taiwan to represent the whole issue of China to negotiate the sovereign issues. So by December 1970, the Chinese government suddenly decided Senkaku Island belonged to China, represented by Beijing. So the point I'm trying to make is the whole issue about Senkaku Island was really a non-issue. And China decided to become an issue, not because of the national interest, but because of this epic struggle for political legitimacy between Taipei and Beijing. And so that's the main issue I'm trying to talk about. Now, about the war, whether there was a war over Senkaku Island between China and Japan, I don't think it's going to happen very likely. But Japan and China will be much more likely to involve in the war, not over Senkakus, but over Taiwan. Because eventually, if China invaded Taiwan, it will involve the United States. And if China wants to stop the United States to join Taiwan and to defend Taiwan, and the first target will be Okinawa, Guam, and many other American installations. So that will bring Japan and China into and the U.S. into the war. The three largest economies in the world will be involved in the war, most likely over the issue of Taiwan, not necessarily Senkaku. And I use up my 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Yu. You are always kind of prescient, or you forecast things that are likely to come, and I like that. Now it's my pleasure to invite our last distinguished panelist, Commodore A.J. Singh. Commodore, please take 5 minutes to make your opening statement, and then we'll go to the questions round. So, Commodore Singh, please.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you, Dr. Adityanjee, for including me in this panel discussion and your kind words of introduction. I keenly follow the CSA discourse on matters of global security with your renowned experts on the subject, and therefore consider myself most privileged this evening to be a part of this galaxy of speakers, which also includes my very eminent scholars as my co-panelists this evening. Thank you very much. This discussion on the potential of conflict between China and Japan over the sovereign ownership of the islands referred to as the Senkakus by the Japanese and Diaoyu by the Chinese could not have come at a more appropriate time. As we heard over the news a couple of days ago, and which Dr. Rao also alluded to, that Japan has begun discussions. I don't think they've opened the NATO office, but they've begun discussions with NATO to open a liaison office in Tokyo. This development has resonated considerably in China, understandably so, and could have far-reaching implications on the future Sino-Japanese relationship. In the context of this discussion, it will impact the maritime dimension, it will impact developments over Taiwan, It'll impact the simmering US-China tension, and most significantly for Japan, the standoff over these islands and the possibility of a future conflict, which is the topic for discussion this evening. Historically, the China-Japan relationship is rooted in a mindset of antagonism and acrimony, despite the deep economic engagement between the two countries. I will not go into the details of this dispute or the historical context, which I will leave to subsequent discussions and the roundtable as we progress, except to say that Japan's territorial claims notwithstanding, there is a definite possibility of at least a major confrontation, if not a conflict, between the two countries by the end of this decade. China, despite its current aggressive stance, will allow time and pressure to reduce the resolve of its adversary before it strikes, which has been the tendency we've seen so far. Japan is also clearly aware that in the event of a possible China-Taiwan conflict, as Dr. Yu mentioned, its location will preclude it from being a passive bystander. And US involvement or not, Japan will get involved into it and must therefore be able to hold its own. It has therefore begun to focus attention on developing adequate military capacity and capability to defend its territorial integrity and its interests in the region. The three security-related strategy documents, which were released concurrently a few months ago, and which Dr. Rao alluded to, the constitutional amendments permitting a more active military participation in global defense matters, and its own perception of its existing constraints have led to a paradigm shift in its security calculus. I'm not going to go into details of the origins of the standoff over these islands, but in the next 3 minutes or so that I have, I will briefly highlight 4 issues which are related primarily to the security dimension. I will be happy to discuss these in more detail along with the other issues during the subsequent interaction. Firstly, these 5 islands and 3 rocks, despite being uninhabited and covering an area of barely 7 square kilometers all told, are strategically very significant from a geopolitical as well as a geoeconomic perspective. They are not only critical for China's ability to break out of its first island chain, but controlling these is also imperative for its bid to reunify Taiwan, particularly if it is going to have to use force to do so. In fact, part of the Chinese claim is based on the fact that these islands were once a part of unified China till the Japanese annexed them. The nationalization of these islands by Japan in 2012 further precipitated this. China is aspiring to become the dominant global maritime power en route to its ambitious plan to unseat the US as the global numero uno. Maritime geography has been unkind to China and its ability to do so. It is expanding its navy at a phenomenal pace, unprecedented by any navy in modern times. Numerically, it already has the largest navy in the world with about 350 vessels and plans to increase this to about 450 by 2030, with 1/3 of them being blue water capable. This massive naval force expansion is obviously not for securing just its own waters. However, if it has to expand its maritime footprint into the Indian, the Atlantic, and the Arctic Oceans, it first needs to dominate the waters surrounding the first and second island chains and reunify Taiwan. This also includes the South China Sea and the East China Sea, hence the importance of controlling these islands. My second point is the constantly lurking specter of unintended escalation. China's grey zone tactics of intimidating its neighbors with its coast guard, which is itself larger and better armed than many of its neighboring navies, and its huge maritime militia of armed fishing boats, presents a formidable threat. Just a few days ago, a Chinese coast guard vessel came dangerously close to a Philippines naval ship in the South China Sea. From China's perspective, its actions seem well within the threshold of escalation, but its carefully calibrated brinkmanship runs the risk of provoking an unintended consequence. In an environment of heightened tension, this could trigger off a full-blown confrontation amongst opposing forces at sea. One may recall that over a decade ago, a Japanese Coast Guard vessel had collided with a Chinese fishing trawler in the East China Sea. It did not lead to a violent reaction at sea, primarily because China at that time did not have the naval capability to retaliate. However, it did lead to widespread protests against the Japanese in China and the imposition of sanctions on supply of rare earth materials to Japan. Militarily, China is much more powerful today, ever eager to flex its military muscle. Geopolitically too, the prevailing situation is far more tense than it probably was 1 decade ago. China has the habit of pushing the envelope to a dangerous level of brinkmanship. It does so frequently in the South China Sea and the Taiwan Straits, and often in the East China Sea. It has done so with India too, with amazing regularity along the line of actual control across the high Himalayas. It has provoked Japan too more than once. A few years ago, it had imposed an air defense identification zone over these islands, and in another instance, it carried out live missile firings over Taiwan, which landed in Japan's EEZ. In 2016 alone, and this was referred to by Dr. Rao as well, Japan had to scramble its fighter jets 1,160 times, of which 73% was in response to China's intrusion into its airspace. My third point, the security situation gets further complicated with the US presence in the region and its constant reaffirmation to Japan that in the event of an attack on these islands, Article 5 of the Defense Treaty will be effective. China, on the other hand, is of the view that since it does not recognize these islands as sovereign Japanese territory and in fact considers them Chinese, any US involvement will amount to an act of aggression on China. It is this trust deficit and difference in perception that China deliberately stokes that makes this dispute almost as much of a flashpoint as Taiwan. My fourth and final issue will be to flag the geoeconomic dimension. Chinese interest in these waters increased exponentially once it was estimated that these waters are rich in hydrocarbons and other marine and mineral resources. China has no choice but to turn to the sea to feed its insatiable appetite for natural resources, to sustain itself economically and remain the world's manufacturing center, as well as for its own economic well-being. These islands, with their spread, cover an EEZ of about 20,000 square nautical miles, with substantial quantities of proven reserves of oil and gas. Hence, as it has done in the South China Sea, where it has taken de facto control of over 80% of that sea that lies within the 9-dash line, it will definitely make a move in these waters sooner rather than later. Before I round off, let me add, and this is for my co-panelist, who seems to be very concerned that Japan is sleeping, that the Japanese Navy, or the JMSDF as we call it, is no pushover. It is the most powerful navy in the Indo-Pacific after the US and Chinese navies. It has very capable multi-dimensional capability with integral air power, modern conventional submarines, Aegis system-equipped destroyers and frigates, and extensive fixed-wing surveillance capability comprising more than 100 maritime patrol aircraft. The new security strategy, which includes the doubling of the defense budget to 2% of the GDP over the next 5 years, and the acquisition of adequate counter-strike capabilities, clearly indicates that Japan is very much aware of the challenge that lies ahead. It is also focusing on strengthening its Coast Guard. The Chinese, therefore, for all their aggressive posturing, will be very wary of taking any untoward step towards Japan. Perhaps the last thing Xi Jinping will want at this stage is a military setback of any kind. However, Taiwan being the red line that it is, and these islands being integral to that, Chinese actions would be difficult to predict if provoked beyond a point, or if it sees an advantageous opportunity to strike. I can go on about the security challenges in the East China Sea and the possibility of a future Sino-Japanese conflict over these islands, but I think I will end here and will look forward to developing a better understanding of this imbroglio for my co-panelists and during the forthcoming interactive session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Commodore A. Jai Singh. Thank you to all the panelists for their opening statements. Now we will have actually moderated discussion, questions from me to each of the panelists, very specific questions. And I will start with a question to Masako Ganaha. So Masako, please unmute yourself. Both Masako and Commodore A. Jai Singh mentioned to this issue. There seems to be a divide between Japanese government posture versus Japanese population about the risk of conflict with China. And I'm going to ask Masako because she's on the ground, she's a journalist, she interacts with persons on the ground. Is the Japanese population willing to fight and sacrifice blood for the sake of Senkaku Islands as distinct from Japanese government. What is your take on that?
So should I be honest? Okay, okay. So it's I love Japanese spirit, but I must say it's sleeping. Because for example, I have many friends in Japanese self-defense force, and I heard from them, from one of the person who does the recruitment, and he was saying he got many phone calls from the parents of new soldiers when Ukraine war hit. Those parents were worried that their son or daughter have to go to war in case something happens. So their family is not ready. And actually, I actually participate to recruit young new graduate from high school. So we are having very difficult time recruiting new members. So what we do is our catchphrase kind of is, you can get a higher income than being a police officer. Before we talking about how it is important to protect our country, we talk about money. This is how much you can make, and your son is not gonna go war. So, and you can have many license, like you can get driver's license. That's how Japanese people have to recruit. It's because of the product of information operation, I must say. And actually, Japanese government can get the information of the new graduate from high school, and they make phone calls. Like if those students are interested in becoming belong to Japanese self-defense force. But there was a huge push from leftist activists and media saying that Japanese self-defense force should not have access to those information. So this is very difficult time to recruit. Of course, there are new, young Japanese who are proud to join the Japanese self-defense force. But overall, it's very difficult in Japan. So overall, I must say it's very difficult. So we the people among those patriots, we say somebody has to sacrifice to wake Japanese people up. That's the point where we are facing.
Thank you, Masako, for a very honest answer. I like the honesty. So there is some groundwork need to be done. My second question goes to Dr. Swasti Rao. Kindly unmute yourself, Dr. Rao. If you were the strategic advisor to President Biden and his administration, hypothetically, would you convince the current administration to work with President CSA wing of Taiwan to agree to make a concession to government of Japan and accept the sovereignty of Japan over Senkaku Islands as a precondition for military, strategic, and security support to Taiwan in case of Xi Jinping invades Taiwan? Would you do that?
That's a very interesting question. Thank you. And I think the kind of brainstorming that we keep doing about scenario buildings, particularly. Well, so two things. So, this entire thing about being ambiguous on Taiwan, the strategic ambiguity on what US response would be. Okay, we all know that there would be some response, but we don't know what level of response would that be. Would it be sending troops on the ground? Would it be like helping the way they are supporting Ukraine? So we don't know. So, well, yes, I mean, if I were in that position, okay, I think I would try to somewhere, bring more clarity over over the status of Senkaku somewhere? Because you see, if I look at it from Japan's perspective, again, two things. Because I spent about 5 years in Japan. I lived in Japan for 5 years, and I was just listening to what Masako was saying, and I totally agree with her that there is. So there is some bit of a disjunct into between how the Japanese people view the security concerns and how the Japanese government or the Japanese policymakers view it. So of course the Japanese policymakers are on point, but the Japanese people are still pretty much haunted, especially the generation she was referring to is still pretty much haunted by that. Now, why am I saying this? Is because I think I would congratulate the government of Japan to really, and especially Shinzo Abe, because ever since 2013, what he has been doing is that he has been trying to strategize information around security concerns in Japan in a way which has actually proved to be pretty conducive. So all the developments that you see happening in Japan right now, while Article 9 being in place, still has been able to happen because of the strategizing of information. So the information strategizing started around 2013, and there were a lot of things that the Shinzo Abe administration did for it. I mean, I don't know we have the time to get into that, but why am I saying this right now to the question, with respect to the question you asked me, was that perhaps that kind of an information strategizing is also important about how Japan looks at Senkaku. So, you could look at Senkaku in two ways. One is that, of course, Senkaku is not really an issue. Senkaku was a part of Japan. And, like many panelists here said that, for China, it is like yet another way of, showing its wolf warriorism, showing the way China would push things to the edge of brinkmanship, etc. But the main thing is Taiwan, the main thing is Taiwan out there. And I say this because what I feel is that if I look at the global actors out there in that situation, a lot of people would not agree, but actually Europe is also a major player there. In fact, a lot of behind closed doors talks that Europe does with China are sometimes also on Taiwan, right? I mean,
Thank you,
I could
Dr.
tell you a lot of
Swasti.
interesting things. Yeah.
Thank you,
So,
Dr. Swasti. Let's
yeah.
not go
So,
beyond the question asked.
yeah.
So I'm
So, yeah, so long story short, I would say that a bit of a clarity on Taiwan, from Japan about, having the sovereignty of Senkaku settled from the Taiwanese side in lieu of support is not really a bad idea, is what I'm trying to say, because Japan has really come a long way forward after its 2013 changes. So I don't think it's a bad idea, and it would really somewhere crystallize the Japanese position around Senkaku, and we would see how China responds to that, because that I think is everybody interested in seeing. So as far as the US and the EU are maintaining the strategic autonomy, that's fine. That strategic ambiguity, it's fine. So Japan can probably afford to be a little more clearer there.
Thank you, Dr. Rao. My next question goes to Dr. Miles Yu. Kindly unmute yourself, Dr. Yu. This has been referred by Commodore A.J. Singh also, but I'm going to ask the question. United States has declared in the past that it took no sides about the territorial dispute between China and Japan. But United States is also treaty bound with treaty commitments for Japan regarding Senkaku Islands. Can you have it both ways diplomatically? Does this not encourage Communist China to take a misadventurous step in East Asia because of US ambiguity? What are your views? I know you are not part of the current administration, but what would be your honest views on this?
Honest view is that the whole purpose of diplomacy is to have it both ways, to serve the larger purpose of averting confrontation. So it works this way. United States said, yes, we do not really get involved in sovereign dispute, but if there is a dispute, there are several things that must follow. Everybody has to follow. One is no use of force to change the status quo. You have to resort to international law, and you have to resort to peaceful negotiation. And most importantly, in the case of sovereignty dispute, any settlement in the future must be agreed to by both sides of the disputes. This is basically the essence of a U.S. policy toward Taiwan and toward many other countries that have disputes with China. So it is actually important for us to understand the three elements of U.S. policy toward China, Taiwan, and the whole region. That is, we recognize the existing administrative control of all the disputed area, including Taiwan, it's self-governed, and including Senkakus, because in the U.S.-Japan Treaty, Mutual Defense Treaty, it says U.S. Article 9 will be triggered if any Japanese sovereign territory and any territory under Japanese administration, and the U.S. would join the fight. So territory under administration does not involve sovereignty. We just say, Senkaku Island simply is administered by Japan. So in that way, we are involved. So if you have the both ways, yes, we can do that. So that's my short answer. I think the longer answer, obviously, it will need more time. So I'll be happy to talk afterwards.
Thank you, Dr. Yu. My next question goes to Commodore A.J. Singh. Commodore, most of the strategic pundits, including Dr. Yu in his opening statement, have maintained that Communist China will not risk a military conflict with Japan over Senkaku Islands. And you did say that China is continuing with gray zone tactics. Do you believe China under Xi Jinping will just continue gray zone tactics just to, brinkmanship? Or will Communist Party control China actually occupy Senkaku Islands? What are your views on that? Please unmute yourself, sir. You are muted.
I think firstly, these gray zone tactics that you're seeing in the brinkmanship we are seeing today is China's way of keeping the pot boiling, keeping things simmering. Because China is still in the process of developing the capacity and the capability to take on a sort of opposing naval force. It is not going to restrict itself to these islands. This is just, they're going to be by the way. It's got a much larger agenda. It wants to be the global maritime power. It's not going to allow itself to get embroiled in this and lose sight of its larger objective. Once 2030 happens, once it has its 450 ship navy, once it wants to break out into these larger sea areas where it has a geographic advantage, it will definitely, if there is resistance to that, it will definitely react. Insofar as the Senkakus are concerned, yes, from a geo-economic perspective, China would like to control them. I don't think it's about putting a flag on a piece of land of 3.4 kilometers or 4.3 kilometers. I don't think that's the intention. China will mark its time like it's doing in the South China Sea. It's established itself now. Now it's waiting and watching. See how do people react. But yes, in its bid to become a global maritime power, if it has to break out of the first and second island chains, it has to be the dominant. It has to establish its maritime dominance here. Out of the 16 exits from the Taiwan and East China Sea into the wider waters, 11 are controlled by Japan. Now that sort of could restrict Chinese movements. So I think it's a much larger picture China is looking at. It's not just about the Senkaku by itself. Also, Taiwan is a red line. If China has to take Taiwan by force, then it is very important that it makes sure that no navy can enter the Taiwan Strait to resist it. And for that, it has to control every entry and exit point into the Taiwan Straits, which includes the waterways which are around the Senkaku Island. So I think we've got to look at the larger picture and not the smaller picture. In response to what Dr. Yu said, that, peaceful resolution, I'm not sure whether it's naivety or whether it is a desire not to, sort of brush the thing under the carpet, that we keep harping on this peaceful resolution and we will talk to China and China nice guys, and Xi Jinping assured us he will not militarize the islands, and look what he's doing. Look what they did in 2016. I mean, that should have been an absolute wake-up call to the world, that they just couldn't care two hoots about what the world thinks. They do what they want to do. And America still following that line. I mean, I find it a little strange.
Thank you, Commodore.
Let me respond briefly. First of all, I didn't say China would not get into war with Japan over Senkaku. I say it's less likely than the Taiwan scenario. Secondly, I don't think. I think with all due respect, Commodore, I think here's what I'm trying to say. The United States insists on peaceful resolution, That doesn't necessarily mean we are naive. That doesn't necessarily mean we are sort of a pacifist. What it really means is if China uses force, if China uses force to change the status quo, the United States will respond militarily without any ambiguity. So that's not a capitulationist. That, as a matter of fact, it is that strategic clarity over the use of force to intervene if China uses force that has kept the Taiwan Strait and entire East Asia at peace for over 7 decades.
Thank you, Dr. Yu. I will request the panelists not to do sidebar conversations. My next question goes to Masako. So Masako, please unmute yourself. And the question to you is that US attempts to forge better triangular relationship between Japan and South Korea are undermined by the bilateral dispute over Dokdo or Takeshima Island sovereignty. Is the government of Japan willing to settle this bilateral dispute with South Korea so that the government of Japan gets full endorsement from a neighboring country, South Korea, in case there's a problem with communist China on Senkaku Islands? Or will government of Japan continue to leave this dispute simmering? What are your views on this, Masako?
I'm not a member of the government, so I don't know what they're planning. But as far as the sovereignty, whatever something has to do about Japanese sovereignty, Japanese government has been always stepping aside and not saying what they have to say. And the island dispute with Russia too. So I think honestly, it's up to the United States. Like I mentioned earlier, like whether if Japan really have our sovereignty or not. So for example, right now, if you go look at the US ambassador's tweet, he is tweeting as if he is the leader of Japan. And let me read one of the tweets he recently posted. He said, I welcome to Japan a new member of the diplomatic corps from the People's Republic of China, ready to engage Ambassador Wu on behalf of a free and open Indo-Pacific that enhances peace and security for all nations. So many Japanese people actually didn't understand why he tweeted and actually got angry because as you know about Senkaku Island, they are invading. So why would we say, well, welcome to this diplomat from China? So it's like this ambassador is ignoring Japanese people's political view and leading Japanese politics. It looks like this. So this is not the direct answer to your question, but as a Japanese, I feel like it's up to United States.
All right, Masako, you sidestepped the question, but if you were the advisor, strategic advisor to Japanese government, would you, encourage them to settle a bilateral dispute over Takeshima Islands with South Korea so that democracies in East Korea can face this challenge of increasingly expansionist, hegemonic, and imperialist communist China? That was the question. If you were the advisor to government of Japan, what would you recommend? Settling the bilateral dispute with South Korea or leave it simmering?
Oh, so I would say we have to maintain the good relationship with South Korea but we should not clearly state that Japanese territory is ours.
Okay, Masako, you have answered the question.
Okay.
It's an honest answer, and I appreciate the honesty. My next question goes to Dr. Swasti Rao. So kindly unmute yourself, Dr. Rao. In your answer to the first question, you actually went to a topic that I was going to ask the question. So the question now is very specific. In your assessment, because you actually dabble in the policy issues with Europe and Europe-Japan relationship, in your assessment, what would be the European Union's strategic posture in case Communist China were to, invade Senkaku Islands? At this point in time, there's no coherent actually voice,
Right.
about Ukraine issue. So what would be European posture on this particular issue?
Okay, so a couple of things in response to this. The first thing is, what would be European Union's posture? The clear answer is that European Union also has a strategic ambiguity when it comes to the question of Taiwan, and it would like to maintain it. Because like I said, that they are already dealing with a very problematic scenario in the eastern side of their continent, which is Ukraine. But when I say this, I'm also aware that this particular situation is also being utilized or manipulated as a as a leveraging tactic in many ways. So, like I said, that the European Union is also trying to grapple or trying to give its relationship with China, give to its relationship with China, a particular kind of a give and take over when it comes to Taiwan. So, for example, you saw what happened recently when the French President Emmanuel Macron went to China and said issued some statements about how Europe does not really want a war, and France really doesn't want a war in especially the Taiwan Straits, etc. But then no matter what kind of a frenzy it created, back home, even the French analysts and all those, the military strategy documents, okay, of the France, of the French government itself, they were very quick to point out that there's actually no change in either the status quo when it comes to cross-straits relations, or with respect to their dependence on transatlantic ties, or with respect to the solidarity for Ukraine. So what I can say is that the situation in Europe is officially that there is a strategic ambiguity. They would like to uphold that there is an upholding of status quo the way it is, but to be very honest, and my assessment is that they do not genuinely have a bit of a plan over what would happen if push comes to shove and something like that happens in Taiwan. What they have been trying to make clear to the Chinese again and again is that when they would impose sanctions on Russia, no matter how dependent they were for their oil and gas and other things on Russia, they've made it very, very clear again and again, especially Ursula von der Leyen, who's the EU Commission president, that China would have to face that imposition of these sanctions. And I'm not sure that China's statecraft, especially the Chinese economic statecraft, actually allows for it and actually wants that. And this is the reason why a lot of Europeans would like to think that there is not going to be a war anytime soon. But this is what Europe thinks about, a crisis in the Taiwan Straits. And in short, the answer is that they also have strategic ambiguity.
Thank you, Dr. Rao. My next question goes to Dr. Miles Yu. Kindly unmute yourself, Dr. Yu. So the flavor of the day is strategic ambiguity, and everyone seems to be, following that. But as far as US government is concerned, they have their priorities very clear. And I recall more than 3 decades ago, Bush 41, there was no strategic ambiguity. There was total clarity to Saddam Hussein that if you invade Kuwait and occupy it as your 21st province, you shall face the consequences. And Saddam Hussein was given, I think, 60 days to withdraw the forces, which he did not. In this situation, if Communist China were to occupy Senkaku Islands and not for 5 kilometers of territory, but for the maritime and natural resources that will bring to China, will United States government take an explicit stand and give explicit security guarantees to government of Japan for taking military and kinetic action in the theater?
Absolutely. I mean, I think, the United States has made it very, very clear that the Mutual Defense Treaty does cover Senkaku Island. When China started making trouble on this issue, I think even during the Obama administration, the U.S. came out to say clearly that any military attack on Senkaku Island will necessarily trigger Article 9, the Mutual Defense Treaty, and the U.S. will definitely come to the aid of Japan. So that's very clear. You mentioned about the strategic ambiguity. In my view, there has never been strategic ambiguity in the U.S. strategic intent to defend its friends and allies. That also includes Taiwan. Before 1980, when Jimmy Carter unilaterally terminated the Mutual Defense Treaty between the United States and Taiwan, there was no ambiguity, obviously. Even after that, this strategic clarity of defending Taiwan takes on different terms, different forms. And you have a Taiwan Relations Act, and even though there was no treaty obligation, but no U.S. president since Jimmy Carter has ever renounced the option of using force to defend Taiwan. As a matter of fact, whenever China become very provocative in this over Taiwan Strait, every United States president has declared clearly that U.S. will, by action or by words, take action militarily to deter China. You mentioned this I mentioned President Clinton, President Bush, and President Biden, even today, has said on 4 occasions, United States military will get involved if China invests. So that's very clear. Now, there's one very important, interesting thing you mentioned about the Saddam Hussein invasion of Iraq. That is, the United States government is not all that smart. Some people made mistakes. I think that's one of the 2 major mistakes the United States made. It's all because of our ambiguity. Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait because we did not give Saddam Hussein a clear warning of military intervention before he took action. Our ambassador to Iraq at the time was April Gillespie. When Saddam Hussein approached her asking what U.S. would do if I invaded Kuwait, she did not give a very clear answer. It was very ambiguous. That's really makes Saddam Hussein take a capitalist risk. Another issue of tragedy as a result of strategic ambiguity was the Korean War. With our Secretary of State, Atchison, made this foolish statement about the South Korea Peninsula outside of the U.S. defense perimeter. The communists will never have invaded South Korea. So that's a tragedy that we have, the lesson we have to learn from. The good thing is that whenever aggression like this took place, United States, without any exception, was getting involved. We could have worked on deterrence much better.
Thank you, Dr. Yu. Thank you for clarifying. The point was that, anyway, we'll leave that besides the point. You did make an important observation that I did not refer to. My next question goes to Commodore A.J. Singh. Kindly unmute yourself, Commodore Singh.
Yes, I have.
Since the Russian invasion of Ukraine and subsequent quagmire, there are lessons learned both by the CCP as well as by Xi Jinping about possible invasion of Taiwan. I think the timeline has been delayed, and probably Deng's policy of, biding the time and regaining the strength or building the strength would prevail. China is also known for what has been called salami slicing in land warfare. And China is showing this incremental approach actually in maritime conflicts everywhere. Would it not be feasible or scenario that China might use occupation of Senkaku Islands as the first step in its larger hegemonic plans for Southeast Asia or South China Sea as well as East China Sea?
I do agree with what you're saying because we are aware of China's, strategy over the years. Salami slicing. They've been doing it on the border with India. They've been doing it in South China Sea. As I mentioned in my opening remark, they keep pushing the envelope to see how far can they go. And when they find that they've reached a certain threshold at which there's likely to be resistance, they stop there and take a step back, but take two steps forward after that, or they consolidate their position over there. They've done exactly that in the South China Sea. Moment a little pressure comes, they hold off. But as I mentioned, this is all because China today does not have the maritime capacity to take on a combination of navies which are ranged against it in the Pacific and thereafter the Indian Navy in the Indian Ocean. And this is where I always mention this, that despite a 3-year standoff along the border with India, there has not been a single confrontation of the PLA Navy with the Indian Navy in the Indian Ocean. They've stayed well clear of the Indian Navy because they know that they cannot take on the Indian Navy in the Indian Ocean. So they are marking their time. They're in no hurry. But they will make a move, like I said earlier. Senkaku becomes very important for them because that if they control those waters, they can then secure part of the Taiwan Strait. They do not want other navies coming to the Taiwan Strait if they have to take over Taiwan by force. And of course, I don't think the Ukraine-Russia conflict really is going to impact China's approach to Taiwan. I think China was well aware of the fact that they cannot afford to have a setback because that veneer of instability that Xi Jinping has created about China being the Middle Kingdom and the whole world kowtowing to China now, and he's built that scenario within his own country. He cannot afford for that to be dented. So I think China will continue to mark time. They will build their naval capacity. They're building it. They will be a potent presence in the Indian Ocean in another 5 or 7 years from now, by the end of this decade, and by which time they would have mastered their aircraft carrier operations. At the moment, their biggest limitation is that despite having 2 aircraft carriers, they are not a confident carrier operating navy as yet. They don't have that sort of experience. That is why the Chinese carriers have never gone beyond the first or second island chain. Only recently the Shandong went into the Taiwan Strait. They hadn't even ventured that far yet because they're still trying to build that capability. But they're training their pilots, they're developing their aircraft, and 5 or 7 years from now, when they have the confidence that they can confidently operate a blue water navy, they will make the blue water approach. The internal reorganization of the military into theater commands is not for a local internal theater command. It is about later on going expeditionary. They watch the American model of theater commands very closely. How do the Americans operate? How do the Americans react to situations? How is their tri-service organization working? And they're going to model their theater commands on that. So China will definitely make a move on Senkaku Islands, not so much, of course, for the geo-economic aspect, but also to ensure that the Taiwan Straits are absolutely secured by them and no other navy can venture into those. But it will take a few years. It won't. That's why I said in my opening remarks, by the end of this decade, we can look at a confrontation or a conflict. Perhaps
Thank you, Commodore. Thank you very much indeed. My next question goes to Masako. Masako, please unmute yourself. I know you are an independent journalist, but if you were the advisor to the government of Japan, what concrete confidence building measures you will suggest to government of Japan vis-a-vis relationship between government of India? For last 3 decades, we have seen, some warming of relationship between Japan and India, but really the spirit is lacking. So if government of Japan wants some support from government of India vis-a-vis communist China, it needs to take some confidence building measures vis-a-vis India, which it refuses to take. what measures you will suggest to government of Japan to improve the bilateral relationship between two democracies in the Quad?
I would like to make sure that I understand your question. So if I were to advise Japanese government on building the better relationship with India, what would I advise?
Yes. Yes, Wendy.
Oh, I see. I thought we have a good relationship already. So I don't know what I can say to advise, but firstly, I have to study about the situation, what people in India think about Japan, then I can say. But as far as I can say, our common enemy is CCP. So in order to stop the expansion of CCP, then I'm sure we can find a common ground, and that's what we have to do. And yes, yes.
All right, Masako. Yes, the relationship is good, but it is really not optimal at this point in time. Anyway, we'll go to the next question. And the next question goes to Dr. Swasti Rao. Dr. Rao, please unmute yourself. Yeah. The immediate cause of World War I was the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungarian Empire by a Serbian nationalist. A small incident like that triggered World War I. Small island chains, 5 square kilometers. Could Chinese occupation of Senkaku Islands trigger a much larger war involving China, Russia, and United States simultaneously, if it were to happen?
Right. So, talking about trigger events and leading to a bigger war. So, I think everybody is aware of the fact that we are looking at the nuclear age. One of the reasons why President Putin has still not pressed the nuclear button is also because of the cost that it entails, in that process. So, regardless of the trigger events, I do not see that expanding to a World War III kind of a stage. But yes, there are certain broader things that I'd like to point out, which I think we have not discussed here. So for the longest time, and especially under President Abe, okay, Prime Minister Abe, I'm sorry. So Prime Minister Abe, so Japan has had a policy of trying to use Russia, trying to use China, to actually try and bring about this settlement of the Kuril Islands between them and Russia. So, but now with the war and everything, so that particular possibility seems very far-fetched. And one of the things that I would definitely like to, tell everybody here is that Prime Minister Kishida, by the way, today is the only perhaps world leader in the G7 that actually constantly, and regardless of how many Japanese I have interacted with after the war has begun, or how many times have I noticed what the Japanese, policymakers have had to say, whether it's Indo-Pacific or in Europe, the one thing that they keep saying is that there is an indivisible security from Europe to Asia. And I think the signal that they want to send across is that there is a solidarity in the alliances. And what the Ukraine war has shown is that there is, it has kind of refurbished that, that faith in alliances, or the dynamic of an alliances in terms of a real war situation. So I think Prime Minister Kishida is actually the only G7 leader that has really gone on record to actually mention why the indivisible security from Europe to Asia is the right paradigm to assess security, and it kind of links everything together and creates this pressure on allies to step up engagement. That's one. The other thing is that yes, certain triggers are important. I think everybody, I'm of the opinion that Chinese would not be so foolish to shoot themselves in the foot right now, especially when they are seeing the kind of sanctions and the way it has impacted, especially in the longer run, what it would do to Russian economy. But like I said, that my takeaway of this entire thing is about how the situation is developing. And like an analyst, I would argue that for sure there has been, regardless of the outcome of the Ukraine war, Russia is going to get pushed, further into the lap of China. And this is something which has been reiterated by the Japanese as well many times over. So regardless of the outcome, regardless of whether it wins or loses, it is going to get pushed with China more. And because the two threats are combining, the response to those threats in terms of the two security architectures would also merge, and that merging has already started. And you mentioned about, for example, the fact that the liaison office has not really opened, but they've only finalized it. Yes, and it is actually, it is actually a parallel development, because a similar thing like a Japan office is getting opened in Brussels, which is the NATO headquarters out there. So it has started, and then I think this particular contouring was very evident after the June 2022 Madrid summit of NATO, where South Korea, Japan, and Australia were for the first time invited over to a NATO summit. So I think what we're seeing now is that we are seeing these, architectures merge. Just the last takeaway is that, from my side, is that everybody's aware of the fact how the security challenges have changed. So I think what we are talking about right away today is a very conventional sort of a war in terms of an attack and a counterattack. But I think if you read whatever literature, alliances like NATO, etc., coming out with, is there is an awareness of how the security paradigm has gotten more complex. So there is what they need to do. Why is it that they're coming to Asia? Of course, they are signaling China, but what is more to it? What is more to it is that they want to, and this is something that I repeat verbatim, which is that they want to co-design and co-develop norms around unregulated security threats. So the AI domain, the cyber threats, the disinformation, etc., and a lot of maritime domain awareness and intelligence sharing. So I think this is a different type of a security architecture which is coming up, and somewhere it also reflects that actually in the Indo-Pacific we do not really have a stable security guarantee of sorts. So you have these concentric circles that kind of join dots to emerge as a deterrent. Whether they'll be a deterrent or not, obviously only time can tell, but my assessment is that it would be very, very far-fetched to argue that there would be a war starting from the Senkaku Islands or the Takeshima or the Kuril. I think there have been ways to coexist with them, and I would agree with a lot of people who said that one has to really sort of, so Japan's answer would be to try and join hands. They have a three-pronged approach. I don't have so much time to get into that, but the last prong of that approach about developing these capabilities is to join hands with partners and allies, and I think this is what they're doing. So the value of a trigger, I think it remains, but I think everybody's aware that you are talking about heavily militarized zones. So while the risk is there, but I would take a cue from the war in Ukraine and say that no, it's not easy to trigger the nuclear weapon, nuclear button so easily. So you would see a localized conflict and something which is not spiraling over very quickly. That's you could say it's my hope, but then I think that's how I see it happening. I think you need to unmute yourself, sir.
My next question goes to Dr. Miles Yu. Dr. Miles Yu, kindly unmute yourself. The question was about Kuril Islands, and I had put a map of the Kuril Islands there. The southernmost 4 Kuril Islands, which Japan claims, are occupied initially by Soviet Union and then its successor state, Russian Federation. As a way of signaling to Communist China, will United States government give an explicit statement in support of government of Japan for vacating the adverse possession?
Okay, so the Northern Territory issue or Kuril Island issue has been obviously a very, very important one. But before I answer that question, let me just go back to a little bit of why this is important. China threat is not just between the United States and China, and that's the mistake to think about that way. China threat is global, involves everybody. So most countries are now realizing that. So there should be less and less ambiguity about that. You mentioned about the Guns of August, the outbreak of World War I. It was triggered by the very important small incident. But before that, it has alliances already formed, Triple Alliance and the Entente Alliance. So in this case, major countries, we all have to come together to face the common threat, global threat posed by the Chinese Communist Party. So that would require all the major countries, Japan, US, EU, even India, to be less ambiguous. So that's why we should never harbor any hope, any delusion about such alliance dominated by China, such as BRICS and SCO. So I think all countries, particularly India, should really play a much more constructive role in joining a much larger alliance against Chinese Communist Party. So having said that, back to the Kuril Island. Yes, Russia and China are together right now on surface. But Russia and China have a clash of ambitions. Vladimir Putin realized China is going to be dominant in Asia, and that's not what he wants to see. Keep in mind, Chinese economy is more than 10 times bigger than Russia. China has a dominant role over Russia in terms of the new platforms of modern warfare, artificial intelligence, cyberspace, undersea, polar, electromagnetic pulse, you name it. So Russia knows this. So for a very long time, Russia tried to find a willing partner in Asia to counter China. And that partner, according to Vladimir Putin, was Japan. And there's several reasons for that. Number one, Vladimir Putin was the only Russian leader, Soviet leader, you name it, in modern history who fancy himself as a Japan expert. He's judo expert or something. So he really likes the Japanese culture a lot. He and the Prime Minister Abe developed a very strong personal relationship. Not the one we saw between Trump and Abe, obviously. But at least these two leaders could talk. So between 2012 and 2014, there was a very good rapport between Abe and Putin. It came very close to solving this northern territory island problem. The formula would be split the four. Russia takes two, and Japan takes two. So the question really is which island, which two will go to Japan, which two will go to Russia. Obviously, Russia will take the largest two and most developed ones. But at least the two countries have the willingness to solve the problem, to face the China threat jointly. And then Vladimir Putin did the foolish thing of annexation of Crimea, which forced Japan to obviously take a stand, join the sanction alliance in this. So what I'm saying here is, the main point is that China threat is not just to Taiwan, to Japan, to the United States, to everybody. And that's why we have to put all those Northern Territory issues, Senkaku issues, South China Sea issues, even Ukraine issues into the major context of China versus the rest of the world. That is, in essence, is freedom versus tyranny.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Yu, for very clear and explicit answer, historically based. And that brings me to my last question, which goes to Commodore A.J. Singh. And it is in relation to something, Dr. Yu, you said about India. And this is an India-specific question for Commodore A.J. Singh. Kindly unmute yourself, Commodore Singh. You are muted.
I've unmuted.
Yeah. So let's say in a hypothetical scenario, you were the NSA and you were advising the government of India. And let's say China occupies either Taiwan or China starts hostilities in the maritime theater in Senkaku Islands. Would you advise the government of India, whatever government of the day it might be, to take a precipitous action, both in the eastern sector as well as in western sector, and correct the adverse possession of the Indian territory that is under Chinese occupation at this time?
Personally, as NSA or otherwise, I'm sure, I don't think India is going to ever preempt military action against China and Pakistan, and definitely not simultaneously with Pakistan. If that is what you were referring to, that we simultaneously land conflict.
I meant actually in Arunachal sector and Ladakh sector.
Right. So
Except in
basically,
Pakistan.
no, I don't think we are going to get into ever going to provoke or begin or preempt a conflict with China, notwithstanding whatever its preoccupations in Taiwan may be or preoccupation with the Senkakus might be. I think we are very, very unlike many countries in the Indo-Pacific. We have a whole different set of our security dynamic with China is very different. We have an ongoing border issue for the last so many years. So I think we will be very, very careful about how we handle this. And I do not think India has the capacity to directly intervene in anything that happens in the Taiwan Straits or in the South China Sea. We may offer support, but our physical presence, I don't think will ever be there.
Thank you, Commodore Singh. You have answered the question. So we had a very frank, very honest discussion on this particular issue. There were different points of views, and actually the cross discussion led to a lot of strategic clarity. And I think by this roundtable discussion, we achieved what we wanted to achieve. That is to make aware the global threat, a hegemonic, an expansionist, and a new imperialist communist China poses to the entire world. Because besides the areas that they have claimed, they have claiming the Arctic as near Arctic state. They are putting a new quote unquote research station in Antarctic, and the first post office in space is started by China. So that tells you the intentions and Chinese threat as an emerging hegemon is very, very clear. So this discussion has achieved whatever we wanted to achieve. I'm very thankful to our distinguished panelists, Masako Ganaha, Swasti Rao, Ajay Singh, and Miles Mao-Chan Yu. I'm also thankful to our audience who took an hour and a half, more than an hour and a half of their time on a Saturday morning. And lastly, the team CSA, Mr. Ripudaman Pachori, Mr. Rajiv Verma, Mr. Ankush Bhandari, the pillars of my support that help me run these kind of, discussions and lectures and things like that. So with thanks to all, we'll be back. Thank you very much indeed, everyone. Namaskar.
Thank you.
Thank you.